First of all, I want to get away from the dictionary definition of a constitution. A constitution must have purpose, and the purpose must be to create a nation that conduces to the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. That is what a constitution must be. And having set the objective of the constitution, you then frame a constitution to achieve that objective.
Because we really do have a race problem. Those divisions are real. We see it in our politics, we see it in our trade union. We see that they take the divisions with them. Look at where people live in this US. You have enclaves in the Bronx and in Richmond Hill and in Brooklyn. They're taking the division with them.
Women are dying in the streets, and we have a government pontificating running around campaigning for women's vote. No women should vote in this election coming up unless there is something done to the legislation as Magistrate Kim is advocating.
That voices like ours that are not in the political trench fighting it out, voices like ours should become stronger. One of the things about the Caribbean is that we have never had one discourse. Bass will know the days of the New World and the Old World and the radical left and so on. What we had was this concourse of ideas, which I think in the early days of independence pushed us in a certain direction. We've got to move back to that point of having these multiple discourses.
Great. Good evening. How are you two gentlemen?
Doing good.
Likewise, I'm doing great.
All right. Well, tonight I know that a lot of viewers are already on, and it's been a wonderful first week we had last week, and we looked at a number of things last week. And for our two guests here tonight, just before I introduce them, tonight we wanted to look at what's happening in Guyana. More or less to capture the voice of the people across the country. People's voice, people's opinion matter. And also, we hope that the political spin stops here. We're not engaging in any political spins. And one of the most interesting thing I think I heard last week, this is post last Monday's show, was that people are interested in discussing not just politics of the day, not just the political stages, but also things that affect them and their families and their pockets and so forth. Tonight, we want to look at what's happening. As we know, over the last couple of days, we have seen yet another majestic announcement of huge oil reserves being discovered again. I think over 100 million barrels, over and beyond what was expected from the well itself. So that has also sent the company's shares skyrocketing. Of course, they have already started to see their own shares and their own profits climb without a drop of oil being reaped as yet or being harvested as yet. So tonight we want to look at how does oil and this whole aspect, without going into the contracts itself, without going into all those discussions, but the economy, Guyana's economy. Oil is one. What about the small man? What about the poor man? How is it affecting him? Whether the poor people of this country are or will ever see the benefits from the oil. And of course, we want to look at the comparison of the economy today, how it was a couple of years ago, and what is expected in the future. Let me introduce to our viewers two of our younger professionals in Guyana. Mr. Joel Bagwandin, who is an economic analyst, and he is also a lecturer at various institutions. He has also been able to capture a lot of his thoughts and his analysis in publications. We have seen his articles in a couple of online and on the Guyana Times and so forth. He's been publishing his views. I must say, having read a couple of them, Joel, good work. And I think you were on point with a number of the analyses you have made, especially with regards to the metrics you're capturing, comparing past to present and predicting what's happening in the future. Very interesting, and I'll come back to this, Joel. Very interesting is your point you made, I think, in today's or yesterday's article, that Guyana's economy does not have to be dependent on oil. We could be self-sufficient without that. And then we have, of course, my other friend here, Mr. Dhanraj Singh, who is the executive director of the Guyana Budget and Policy Institute, which takes a deep dive into the budget aspects itself, the policies that drive the budgets, and of course, how that budget and how those funds are being allocated and used for the national good. I think I've captured both of your background well, but I'm just going to allow you a couple of seconds to introduce yourself and probably say a few words. Over to Joel.
You starting with the junior man first?
Yes, yes.
Well, I think you said it in a nutshell. I'm an analyst by heart. I've been professionally 12 years of professional experience. I have most of my experience in the banking industry. So I have a fair understanding of how the financial system works and how the economy works in Guyana. And I have a teaching background as well. So I'm hoping to leverage that teaching background for your show here tonight.
Beautiful. And let's go to Mr. Singh.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to Globespan as well for the invitation to be part of the program. I wouldn't add much more to what the description you have said. I think you have said enough about us in individual, except to say that I think what we all share in common is that we're all passionate about Guyana, and we all want to see what is best for the country. As you rightfully said at the beginning, politics aside, what we want to discuss about is substance, and I'm happy to share whatever insights I have and to participate in that discussion meaningfully.
Correct. And let me just say this too, I think both of you gentlemen know, but to our viewers out there, I did try to make contact. In fact, I personally made a call to a few persons who I think would better understand and appreciate the government's position on the economy and the government's economic policies. I was unable to get anybody to come on the show from the government side. In fact, I made a call and sent email even to, I think it's called the Department of Public Information, but haven't gotten a response. I'm sure probably they're working on it, but we'll proceed nevertheless. So guys, of import is the most recent discovery. We had, I think yesterday, announcement was made, and if you go to the Oil Now page, you will see that they would have said that this, I think it's still out that it's exceeding 100 million barrels. It's the words they use. It was above and beyond what was expected from that well. In all aspects, I think you would both agree. In all aspects, the finds or the discoveries that have been made on the Guyana blocks have surprised not only those who were drilling, but the entire world. And I think that goes to say too that, what's this thing about how is it going to affect our economy? Now, let me just say this too. We have heard, I think somebody from the WPA had floated an idea of there should be a cash handout to every citizen in Guyana. And there you have a little picture there on screen of the discoveries and stuff like that. But I think somebody from WPA or AFC had floated at one time that there should be some cash handouts again. I don't know what's the economic reasoning behind cash handouts, but it's something we can look at. But Joel, I want to go to you, and Dhanraj, feel free to jump in too. Let us talk a little bit about the economy as is, without being. There's no negativity here. I want you from the economic perspective, to both of you, to look at the economy as is today. This has nothing to do with what would have been post 2015. Let us look at what's happening today. And I think Globespan will be also running a little poll. Are we the small people better off with the economy as it is today? Are we having something better to hope for given what's happening today? And I think in your analysis, you can do a flashback of what was it a couple of years ago. And over to you, Joel and Dhanraj. Let's take it from here.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mahadeo. Well, you have read my article, and you're quite correct. I did the last couple of weeks. I was focusing on an analysis over the last 8 years, and incidentally, I saw Dr. Raul Lucas did a attempt to do a similar analysis comparing, but he looked at a different period, and he concluded that in the last 4 years, looking at GDP, we had better growth compared to those years which he used. But when you look at the period I look at was 2011 to 2014 as the base period, and 2015 to 2018. So the average GDP for that period, 2011 to 2014, was actually stronger at 4.75% compared to the 4-year periods, 2015 to 2018, which was 3.13%. Now, I don't want to be too technical. So for the average person to understand what is GDP, we got to understand what GDP measures. So GDP essentially measures 4 variables. And in the most simplest sense I could put it, it's increases in spending in 4 different aspects of the economy. That is government spending, investments, net exports, right? And private investments. Now, when you look at the last 4 years, where that growth came from, take for example, in 2018, everybody was excited. The politicians talking about this fantastic 4.1% growth, and Nasdaq had an article, and I think that article was taken a little bit out of context. That article in Nasdaq was from an international perspective of how they see Guyana. In terms of achieving what Nasdaq was saying, it's a whole different thing altogether, and we'll get into that later on in the discussion. But when you dissect that 4.1% growth, it came from increases in government spending. Now, economists will tell you that government spending is important to stimulate growth in the economy and running budget deficits, which we have been doing for the last couple of decades. We've always had a budget deficit. We never had a budget surplus, meaning the revenues that the government earn is never greater than the expenditure. What is important is where the government spending is allocated. And to my surprise, when you look at the numbers, government revenue has increased exponentially by 40% over the last 4 years, compared to 2011 to 2014 by 217 billion, and expenditure increased exponentially as well. The thing is, when you look at it, most of it were concentrated in consumption, right? Consumption goods. Nothing. Consumption expenditure is money spent on consultants and to pay for goods and services and so forth, right? When you look at capital expenditure and public investment, that has actually declined, and that is very troubling, right? So if we're going to use that without getting too much into all the technical details, if I'm to sum that up, if we're going to use that as a trend to see the big talk about how we're going to spend oil money, if we're going to use it to spend on consumption and not to divert it in productive sectors and to build infrastructure and to transform the economy, then we could have the greatest oil contract, but it would make no sense. When you look at how
let's take a pin there, because you mentioned something that's important. You see, government spending, it's not bad. In fact, I think Ghana and a few other places, basically the economy is about government putting back money into the economy. Right. It's a lot of investment by government itself. I think Ghana is key in it. But to your point, government will be spending, as you have said, in the economy, but what they're spending it on, it's not long term. It's not stuff that is it's not investment.
Correct. Let me give an example. Now, oftentimes you'd hear when politicians speak that we've spent, my colleague Dan Raj will talk more about the budget, and in the last 4 years we spent $1 trillion. But when you look at every sector, if you go through the budget estimate and the budget speech, and you look at every sector, education, health, infrastructure, 75% of the allocations are towards rehabilitation and maintenance of infrastructure, rather than, for example, education, focusing on improving the quality of education, focusing on improving the curriculum, right? If we're not focusing on those sort of things, then we will not experience the kind of development that one would expect in a modern world, in a modern country.
But let me be devil's advocate. But any government would have to allocate funds to maintain its infrastructure.
That's correct. Yeah.
Right. So is the funds that were allocated towards maintenance more than what would have been so in the past, and does it speak to probably shoddy work? because one of the cries we have had maybe since independence is every major capital work we do is so shoddy that, you know, the cost of correction is always going to be huge compared to the cost of getting it right the first time. So is it something that both of you want to jump on? Because if our maintenance cost of the cost of maintenance of infrastructure cost is going to go up exponentially, then it means something is really wrong. And then you call into question the boards, you call into question the experts that are paying for these work and vetting it.
Dr. Mahadeo, so I want to go back, just pivot a little bit back to the original question that you answered, because I think there's some meat there that we need to chew on a little bit. You asked the question of whether we're better off in this period than we were before. And I'm going to build on what Joel said. And the clear answer to that is no. The data does not support that in any way or form when you look at it. And I'll point to you to a couple of things to help put this in context. Leaving oil aside, leaving 2019 government spendings and allocation aside, what we know for sure is what happened at the end of 2018. So let's take 2018, 4 years back, which 2015, and then compare that to the 4 year prior to that. So we're doing a comparable analysis, yes? In the last 4 years, we spent $931 billion. And all we did is added 38 billion for GDP in our real economy. That's what the real economy grew by. Now, if you compare that to the 4 years before, where the government spent about $887 billion in total over the 4 year prior to that. That's 14, 13, 12, 11. Yeah. It added $60 billion to the economy, to the real economy. Right. So you'll see a trend here. We're spending more, but what we're getting in return is less. Let's look at let's look at something else. When you look at the share of the budget, our spendings that was financed by debt spendings, in 2015 it was 1%. At the end of 2019, that figure soared to 18%. What does it show? Again, we're spending more money, but what are taxpayers getting in return for it? Let me give you another figure. Taxation, tax revenues from 15 to 19, if we include 19 projections now, 15 to 19, the government would collect revenues from taxes to the tune of $900 billion. Compare that to the 5 years prior to that, 2010 to 14, the government collected just $600 billion. That's $300 billion more in the immediate last 5 years. The question arises then again, what are taxpayers getting in return for this? We look at education. Are our schools better off? Are families any better off? Are they able to send their children to school and get a textbook that was printed 2 years ago? Right. The families that I'm talking to clearly not seeing where that growth or where that benefit is coming from. Are we better off in health and human services? Are families able to go to the health center and get a simple medication, some Panadol, without having to go and pay ridiculous prices, or just do it without? Families have to choose to be sick versus getting access, yet we're spending more money. The same thing we look at infrastructure. Are we better off with our infrastructure? Are our roads better off? Or our local communities, do we have better infrastructure in these? Again, I can go through a list, and systematically what you will find is, if I capture it in a phrase, is this: taxpayers are paying more and they're getting less in return. That's just the hard core of what the data is showing. So we're not better off. Now, on the issue of whether or not we will be better off with the oil money, just to tilt a little bit. You know, the old people have a saying that what you see daytime, don't take candlelight to see nighttime. If the last 5 years, without oil money, we have spent, and this is including 2019, $1 trillion and over, $1.2 trillion to be exact, including 2019 spendings approval. One major transformation that we have seen in the economy that makes the average family go home and say, you know what, this really did something good for my life. I can save a little bit more for when hard time hit, or I can afford better quality of life for my family. Give me one. What the taxpayers get for that $1 trillion?
Well, let me ask you this, both of you. So there's been a discussion ongoing, and one of the things that was one of the opinions that were given out was that what this government seemed to have done was to say, okay, oil is coming, so forget everything else, because oil will save the day. So what would have happened is that agriculture was kicked aside, the small industries were kicked aside. I think a couple of years ago, small industry started to really boom. I was once chairman of the Matching Grants Initiative, and the amount of help that the IDB was giving to the small businesses to get themselves HACCP certified and so forth was, it led to a lot of imagination and a lot of pride and a lot of achievements for small businesses. So small businesses have been kicked aside. The security of the country, I think, is under great threat. But also, the greater question is, do you think they have sacrificed all that's happening or all that could have happened with a well-run economy because the oil money is there? And with that, I'll throw in something else. What oil money? I mean, a lot of people are questioning what oil money. There are two things we need to look at in this discussion. One is the Sovereign Wealth Fund, or I think we call it the Natural Resource. Legislation for the Natural Resource Fund was passed in January this year, which was not attended by the opposition because the no confidence motion had taken place in last year in 2018. So there's a legal question that would have to be asked about the validity of the legislation that was passed, because the CCJ said that the NCM was valid. Now, that aside, the Natural Resource Fund is in place, but amazingly, the Natural Resource Fund, as with everything else, and this is something that Guyana needs to really, really start paying attention to, all of the management of natural resources, management of wealth, management of everything is politically directed. I don't care who's in power, but the fact that you have the investment fund being run from the Ministry of Finance, God help us all. Because there's nothing to boast about of what's happening to date. So what will happen to the oil money in the future? Yes, what I think will happen is, whoever is in government might probably give out some vouchers and give out some stuff to keep people quiet and keep them happy, especially at election time. But generally, go back to what you two said. The core of the economy is rotting away. And when the core is rotting away, eventually there'll be a collapse, and we're going to become no better off that the countries, and this Dutch disease that they're talking about, well, maybe Guyana will be making a new type of descent that we'll get into. But you see, you can turn that on its head. There is hope. There is hope because there are people that are willing to speak out. There are people who are willing to talk about what's going on, and there are people like you guys who are willing to come on board regardless of who's in power. And I'll add this last comment before opening back to you two guys. There's been a lot of discussion, and I myself have been attacked that, we're attacking this government. We're being negative about what this government is doing, why we're not comparing to what the last government is doing. And I have said every time, the last government, whatever they did, they are where they are now, in opposition. And you, because of what you're doing, may very well find yourself in opposition. The issue here is good governance, good management of our resources, not who, but how. So over to you guys. Now, Joel, I want to pick you up and Danraj up, because if we were, go back to both what you said, if we were to ignore oil, and your conclusion in yesterday's article, and Danraj, you said it too, the economy is growing, according to the Ministry of Finance, at 4% average per annum. And therefore, it means that's a healthy growth. 4%, forget that we're going to be 20% next year.
It's healthy in theory.
Yeah, but you look at the top, let me just pull this up. You look at the top economies in the world. The top 15 growing economies are Ethiopia, Rwanda, Bangladesh, India, Ivory Coast, Cambodia, you name them. But when you look at the right-hand column, agriculture, everything is food-based, right? Feeding the starving world. Yet we have sacrificed, we have closed the door of the sugar factories, we're closing the door of the rice industry, we're sacrificing everything because there is oil. Over to you.
So, Doc, Joel, permit me to jump on this before I lose my train of thought on this. First, on this issue of Dutch disease, I always say to my fellow economists, don't blame the Dutch. This is our government issue. This has to do with how we're managing our own economy and our affairs. Now, you asked the question of at the beginning of whether or not we're sacrificing the non-oil economy with the hope that oil will solve everything. And again, the evidence shows that this, either by intention or by accident, is exactly what the government, the current administration, did. I'll give you two examples. Agriculture. Funding for agriculture in 2015 was $22.5 billion a year. We have heard so much rhetoric from the administration about small farmers, and it's important for agriculture, and we're going to diversify, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. But every single year from 2015 to now, they have systematically cut funding for agriculture to the point where in 2019, only $17 billion allocated for agriculture. So one, the policy and the resource allocation did not match with the rhetoric. Two, the issue of Gaisuku that you mentioned. The government own commission of inquiry literally put this in verbatim. It says, it does not advise against closing any of the estates. Yet, all these experts' opinions were pushed aside and the government closed, three estates? Here, what is shocking about that story? The argument was, we don't have fiscal space. We can't subsidize this industry and we can't continue to subsidize this industry. Well, look at the numbers. On average, the subsidy for Gaisuku was around $8 billion a year, even if it fluctuated from 8 to 10, roughly $1 billion a year. Interestingly, you cut the industry almost in half, cripple it, saying that you'll save X amount of billion dollars. But guess what? In the office of the president, now the Ministry of Presidency alone, in 2015, it received $4 billion in funding. In 2019, do you know what that figure is? $12.4 billion.
That's huge.
So how is it that you find $8 billion to put in one ministry to pay for more bureaucracy and red tape, but you can't find $8 billion to subsidize an industry which is keeping the economic heart of your country pumping?
Correct.
It makes no sense. I'm going to allow Joel to comment on this before I go on.
Go ahead, Joel.
Very interesting point, and I want to pick you up. See, on the point, the question you talk about, the oil. Everybody thinks this oil is some big savior, and what are we doing to the other sectors? So in the last 4 years, we have lost $647 billion from the other sectors. From sugar alone, we have lost about 40%, 227. Combined $647 billion. That's about 95% of real GDP as of the end of 2018, right? See, my contention is this. The economy has been miraculously kept afloat from 2015 to today because of oil-related investments in the economy and gold. Now, critics have said, and some persons asked me the question, look, let's not dissect the figure, let's look at it as it is. I said, no, you cannot, because there's a particular reason why I deliberately take gold out of the equation to look at it, because we only found oil the other day. So what's happening in the economy today with oil? This will not have been happening. This is just the other day. And we didn't even start pumping oil as yet. Now, why did I take gold out of the equation? Now, you recall in 2013, we had the world market price for gold plummeted. Correct. In 2013, I was in a place called Northwest. I spent 3.5 years in Northwest. Northwest is largely driven by gold mining. And at that time, gold price was about $1,500 an ounce US. That's close to $300,000 an ounce, right? When the price plummeted, instantaneously the next day, you felt the negative consequences instantly. Right. And from the period when I was there, a couple of months in 2013, I experienced what a boom is on a micro scale. What does that mean? A taxi man who driving a car makes $100,000 a week, and that's conservative. On holidays like Easter, a taxi man makes $200. I've seen people buying cars, go to this place, work it, and leave it there as junk because they made back 5-10 times the money. They could afford to park it and junk it. Now that's literal experience of what a boom is on a micro scale. And then when that happened in 2013, we felt it. Now this could have been macro, because when you understand what really caused gold price to plummet, it was not because of a real demand and supply issue. It was a confidence issue. At that time, the global economy was just coming out from the global recession. And that financial crisis, which stemmed from the US economy, spill into we had now the Eurozone crisis. So a few countries there were debating whether which one will come out, and they're debating a fiscal package, a stimulus package to save it. So what one country did is they sold a country by the name, I don't know if I know this pronunciation correct, Cyprus or something to that effect.
Yeah.
But what they did, they decided to sell off a large chunk of its gold reserve, right, to save it from going into a crisis. Now, this is what caused the gold price to plummet. But it is important to understand a distinction. It is not because when they sold this amount of gold, the market was flooded. No, the price fell because investors became fearful that if you're going to sell off the other problematic countries in this crisis zone, they might decide to sell. And if that had happened, then we would have a real flood on the market. But that did not happen, but it didn't stop the price from collapsing. So that is the fundamental background why I particularly take gold out of the equation, because these are real risks which could happen.
All
We
right.
take it out today, we'd be having a different conversation. We'd be in the economic crisis, right?
So Joel, let's just go to another level. All this talk about the economy. You and I, the three of us, our viewers, of course, we would understand what's happening at the macro level. Let's go down to the pensioner, down to the village. Let's go down to the single parent, down at one of the communities. What can the single mother with 2 children, the pensioner living alone, what can they look at in terms of the economy? What I know has been happening is that now I believe pensioners are paying VAT on their electricity. Now they're paying, so their expenses would have gone up, even though the government would have said that over the past years they increased the pension payable to the pensioners. However, let's take the economic discussion down to the people, to all of us, because at the end of the day, as Danrad said eloquently, we're the ones funding the huge expenditure, the irresponsible expenditure of the government. And at the end of the day, what's going to come back to us and what can we look out for? Because across the country, people are crying, oh, taxes are increasing. There's just more and more taxes. And Joel, Danrad, I would like if we could go down a little bit to how we can cater for this, or how the country can cater, what the small man can look out for. And Joel, I want to come back to you on something else, and that is, cogitate on it a little bit. But this whole discussion about the economy and sugar and all of that, whether there is in terms of the taxes, in terms of what's happening at the top level, whether there is an incentive for the government in terms of the following. Pre-2015, we have heard a lot of talks about the illegal monies in the economy. There seemed to have been pre-2015 a huge swath of monies that was illegal and floating and keeping the economy afloat. So if that money was afloat then and kept this economy afloat now, then it means that the government is accepting that it's now taking money out from the small man to meet the public expenditure, because that money is not there anymore. So Joel, I would like if you can come up with, discuss that, and then let's go down to how our discussion can affect the small man.
So I want you to bear with me, because I want to touch on something, a question that I didn't answer at the beginning, then I'll come back to this. You talk about, I want to give the government props for taking the initiative and starting the discussion, at the least, whether symbolically or even if it's not in the constitutionally right way, to actually have the discussion on the sovereign wealth fund. Yeah? Props. As you rightfully point out, whether or not this will stand is for constitutionalists to figure that out. The problem with this, however, is this. Venezuela has a sovereign wealth fund.
Good point.
Look at the economy today. And so you point to the exact important aspect of this sovereign wealth fund conversation. Having one alone is not going to solve the problem. That is only going to be a bank account where the money is kept. How is it managed? What is the oversight? Who have control over it? And are we ring fencing certain portions of the money that is coming in and earmarking it for things like transportation, investing in education and public health? If we're not doing that, we're not having a sovereign wealth fund or natural resource fund, whatever you call it, is not going to change anything. It's just going to be just there for the fact that we have it. It's really not going to do anything. And I agree with the position that you take, that you have to have an independent management of this fund and oversight of this fund. That's the only way it's going to make sense. Coming back to the small man, navigating to the small man conversation.
But
Professor Thomas.
Andrew, before you go, let me tell you this. So the legislation, the discussion on that legislation, let me just pull this document up. It allows, the sovereign wealth fund, the management of it allows for participation by the Ministry of Finance, by the Ministry of Natural Resources, by the opposition, by the Association of Bankers, and I think there is one more. I can't remember which one I just said. But there is the perception that it caters for the inclusion of everyone. However, my fear is, like the state boards, there's a perception that you have private sector and you have this and you have that. But if you don't sing a government's tune, you're not in it.
Look, let's call it for what it is. Catering for participation is another way of saying, I'm going to hear where you sit, but I'm going to do what I want.
Correct.
Okay? So the language here, always politicians tend to take shelter from it. You can allow for everybody to participate. But at the end of the day, where does the buck stop? If the government ultimately has the final call of what happens to this money, without sort of putting it in the hands of professionals who can say, here is the financial analysis, here is analysis that says this is how the money is best used for the population and to give the best return to Guyanese people for their money, you're going to end up in the same problem. I can list a number of countries who have this issue. They have the sovereign wealth fund, but the regulation, it is so crafted that it's just a facade. You don't have independent control and sort of professional controlling this.
Let me pick you back up on it. You see, there's another factor in this whole argument. Guyana is a small country.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the FIU, Finance Intelligence Unit. The question, I attended a training the other day. Well, they had I wouldn't call it a training, but an information dissemination seminar maybe. And one of the questions I asked was whether the head of the FIU was a politically exposed person. The problem is, well, not problem, but there is an issue we must face. Ghana is a small country, and generally people who are qualified, maybe, I don't know you guys, but you may have a relative or somebody that is a politician. So how independent can we truly be, Danraj? Because while you give the government the props, they have done this. That is true. The act is in place. They have also, and let's give them some kudos for this too. They have held stakeholders forum. They have called the public to attend different meetings and seminars to share information on the sovereign wealth fund and stuff like that. So that's good. But I think the question we need to ask ourselves too, are we expecting too much in a paradigm where in a small country where everybody knows each other and everybody's everybody's relative, then how do you then say there's complete independence?
So that's an excellent rebuttal. And here's the response that I have for it. First, I refuse emphatically the argument that as a small country, we have to be satisfied with these kinds of nuances in the way we're setting up and aiming for to have some independence and autonomy in the way these funds can be managed. I refuse that argument. Now, I don't think the question is how independent or how much we can hope for. The question we ought to ask is, are we doing sufficient enough to guard against politicians using this as a slush fund for whatever they feel is a priority? And I do not believe what we have done so far is doing enough. We can do more. And that is in a sense, look, you have professionals, whether or not you people, we all do have some political inclination of what our political views are. We have that. But do not tell me that they are not professionals who can stand and make decision, especially when it is not one person in charge, it's a collective in charge, and they're not subject to political pressure. If there is no direct political pressure that they're subject to, I refuse to believe that a group of professional-minded people can come together and make better decisions than otherwise would have been. It might not be the perfect, but the alternative to leaving this for just politicians to make decisions on, clearly we would be able to improve on that.
Great. Well, let's go to the small man a little bit, and we got to go to Joel for his analysis.
So this is the issue. Yes? The way I was making the point that Professor Thomas is the one who proffered this started this discussion in the public domain of giving a cash handout to people cutting a check. Now, again, I can understand elections are coming close, and that is a good soundbite, a good political soundbite, because in many ways you can talk about that and why it's not good. But from a strict economic policy perspective, that is a terrible policy. It's terrible for very many reasons. Now, they are a small percentage of the population who direct cash transfer makes sense. People who are the elderly, they have done their time, they have worked their life out, they have given to this country whatever way they did, they ought to be able to afford basic standard of living. I get that. People in the disability community, members and people who are disabled in some form or the other, it's our responsibility as citizens to take care of them. I get it, those individuals. But cutting a check to any and every, the entire nation and say, here's a check from the oil money is terrible use of the money. What you ought to do is to take that money and invest it in services that will build a solid foundation that benefits everybody, from the smallest man, regardless of your race, your belief, where you live, and what are some of those things you talk about. Strengthening your education system. Okay. You and I are sitting and talking here, and my niece is going to start school in 2 weeks, and her father, who works in a small farm, has to find $20,000 to pay for textbooks that the school literally said to him, we should have this to give you, but we don't have enough copies. What is that? That's a way that you can empower the next generation. That's a way where the same single parent mother that you talked about and the child who is growing up with a father alone, or a poor family who is scraping to make ends meet at the table, those are ways in which the oil revenues can help these families lift their quality of life. Absolutely. They don't have to worry about they have to send their children to school. At least we should be able to provide them with an internet access in their school to be able to do research, with quality textbook that they can use. They should be able to have a regular doctor's appointment and checkup that they don't have to spend thousands of dollars or their life savings on just because they have a sickness. Fathers and mothers shouldn't have to choose whether they should pay their rent this month or they should be able to pay a doctor fee if their child gets sick. But these are the options that the average family face. So use the money and put it in a way that everybody benefits. Because if you start cutting check to people, guess what? When the oil runs out, where is the next check coming from? And have we done anything to lift the economy in any meaningful way?
I agree. And also, there's so much we can pick from here, and maybe we'll have to schedule another show at some stage with the three of us. But there's so much we can pick from this, because nothing is being said about the longevity of the NIS funds. Nothing is being said about us setting up some sustainable strategies to help not just the poor and disabled, but to help kids who have talent. I mean, one of the issues I know a lot of people have said, I believe my son is talented. But you know what? It's like when we go to school, the talent is being stifled so that everybody can be at a particular level. There has to be, and again, I think we need to remind ourselves that our Constitution still has something about free education in it, right? Or whether it's free is another matter. Joel, let's go quickly to you and talk a little bit about our discussion point that I left you with.
Yes, I'll answer that question in one sentence. You asked the question, what does it mean for pensioners? Now, the money that pensioners get in old age pension and whatever NS can't even do to sustain them for a week or 2 weeks, much less a month. Now, let's put some numbers into perspective. What we have seen, the growth that we have had, the economic growth we have had, and increases in government spending, it was from increasing the level of taxation rather than widening the tax base. So
Right.
what we have done effectively is we have taken out $182 billion from people, from their householders, from pensioners, and from employees, people who work with companies, and from companies, $182 billion, and we've placed it in government revenue, and they have in turn spent $250 billion. That's 100% increase on consumption. Nothing that would add value to their lives, nothing that would put more disposable income and improve the quality of their life. Right?
Right.
$250 billion, that's the size of the whole 2017 budget alone
Correct.
on consumption, nothing productive. Right?
Correct.
I want to take up another point that Raj built on education and so forth. You see, and I'm looking at the time, we have 15 minutes to wrap up, or less than 15
Right.
minutes. Let's talk long term now. We talk about a lot about the problems and government spending and GDP. If we're to put in one element, identify one thing that this country that has been keeping us back from development, is the cost of energy. The cost, we have one of the highest cost of energy in the region. All right. If we had gone for projects like the hydro and we were able to significantly reduce our cost of energy, then that alone could have saved sugar industry. That could have allowed our economy to take off as an industrialized economy like China, right? If you look, you see what is so painfully, if I'm to use a terminology, painfully ridiculous, is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I
Correct.
have three comparative countries that I like to make reference to: Dubai, Singapore, and China. If you look at these countries' development, they invested in human capital and infrastructure. The one thing common in all three of them: human capital and infrastructure. When Dubai found oil, they recognized at the onset, and look how many years ago Dubai found oil, and they recognized since then that oil would not last forever. And instead, what they did, they recognized that Dubai is strategically located, and they transformed that country from a fishing economy to a tourism and shipping economy, finance, and they built ports, so they become a regional hub. You look
Correct.
at Singapore. The funny thing is, Singapore and Guyana gained independence at the same time, but Singapore has absolutely no natural resource. Yet
Correct.
today, Singapore per capita income is 57,000 euros. That's 12 times Guyana's per capita income, which is 4,500. All right. And what did they do? They invested in human capital, education, infrastructure, and also they capitalized on their location. Let's look at Guyana's location. Why do you think Brazil want to build the road linkage? And we're talking for many years. I hear we talking about the water port and road link in Brazil. See, if we do these two projects, Guyana, like Singapore, is strategically located where we could become a regional hub. We could become the Dubai for the region, where we could become where goods trading for the whole region, South America, we could pass through here. That alone could take up this economy, not oil. All right. So putting that into perspective, I want to give my closing point on this whole thing about this excitement about oil. You see, without getting into the technical details of whether the contract is bad or good, I will not get into that debate. But what I would say is this: there's a reason why the contract is nonetheless a decent contract. Nonetheless, Guyana will earn from it significantly compared to Guyana's economic status, compared to our GDP, compared to our population. It's really decent, right? What is important is how we would spend it, and we're not seeing very good indications from the trend in the numbers that we're going to spend it productively. All right.
Correct.
See, we got to recognize, and our politicians got to recognize, that oil will not last forever. There's a reason why Exxon has the contract that it has, because it has recognized that in the next 20 years, the global energy market is changing rapidly, and that is driven by climate change policies. Countries
Good.
like China, Japan, Australia are leading in that respect.
I agree. So Joel, one other thing, both you and Anraz, I'd like to challenge you that at some future, hosting like this that we can have, let's discuss that whole aspect. We won't have time tonight to get into it, but let's discuss that whole aspect of the allegations of the pre-2015 money. the black market money that would have been there, and that whole thing. It's a huge discussion. This is why I'm asking you. Let's put it for another time. Now, one of the things that I think we need to also be very cognizant of is the whole geopolitical paradigm that I don't believe enough attention is being paid to. Venezuela, look where it is now. Look where Brazil is compared to Dubai. Obviously, Dubai holds a lot of importance, not just to North America, but to the entire world. So geopolitical discussion is something else we'll have to do at some stage. But you are so right that you look at, 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago, how these countries were, Singapore, all of them, how they were compared to where they are and compared to where we are. I think one of our viewers said, if I can go to some of the comments that were sent to us, that one of our viewers looked at the whole thing about hydro that was there pre-2015. Another person asked us to look at the whole aspect of, let me look at this very quickly, excuse me. Yes, ask us to look at the Exxon contract and the whole aspect of the contracts that were signed. And again, I think one of the persons are asking us to look at the contracts that were signed pre-2015 versus post-2015. I think I'd like to throw this to the two of you. I would like to think if I'm the president of this country tomorrow, one of the first things I'll do is say, let's come to the table and renegotiate all of these contracts. You need me. You need this country's resources. So let's renegotiate. What's your take on that?
I'll end on my take on that, but 2 quick points very quickly. You see this issue, taxpayers again fund billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, and we spent on doing all of this work on the hydro. How is it that administration change and you can just abandon all of this money that you tax hard-earned average persons to pay for? Somehow we need to rethink legislation that if you're going to fund a project beyond certain amount and it has passed Parliament, the National Assembly, and you have already spent X and Y amount, regardless of whether the administration change or not, we ought to see whether there is a way in which we can say you need to continue this investment, because literally all this is money that ordinary families could have put in their bank account or invest in their children. It's down the drain.
It goes to what we said earlier. This whole thing about setting up independent committees. The fact that this committee was under the government's umbrella, when the government changed, they threw it out because it meant you're making the last government look good.
Quickly, in the last couple of budgets, there was a lot of talk about enjoying the lifestyle and looking for the poor. And one of the things that is always touted that the government did is, we keep improving the tax-free threshold, the tax deduction threshold from 300 and some thousand. I think now it's at 720. But let me ask this question. If last year, 2 years ago, you had a job where you're making $300,000 a year and you're not paying tax, but you're struggling to make ends meet with your family, 2 years after, when they increase that threshold to 720,000, is that benefiting you in any way?
Correct.
It's not benefiting you in any way. So while I understand that marginally you will capture some higher income people and giving them back some more money, you still miss the core of the people who are struggling in poverty and can't find a way to keep their family afloat. That again, it's a policy that never come to understand how is the government pursuing this in the name of supporting the poor.
Let me ask you this question. Might be a yes or no. As we're parting, we're going to part company tonight. Let me ask you this: if things continue the way or the current trend, 5 years from now, will the people across Berbice and Essequibo and Demerara, the non-professionals, will their lot be better off 5 years from now if the current trend continues?
You said it's a yes or no answer? No.
Okay.
I would be lying if I tell you that the answer is yes too. So that is another way of saying no. We can't continue the way we are going right now. So on the issue of the oil, I will strongly encourage that we take another segment or some other time to discuss this issue with the oil and whether or not people are gonna benefit from this, because there's so much to discuss about that. But all in all, I think it's clear that when you look at where we are today, even in the absence of oil money, We have spent, taxpayers have doled out billions of dollars more and give it to the current administration that it has given to any other government in the past. Yet today, we cannot say, the average family cannot look at you with a straight face and tell you things are better off today. And therein lies a big problem that we have to fix. Other than that, we're not going anywhere as a country, regardless of the rhetoric.
All right. Well, I think our viewers, everybody in Guyana, need to remember something. In a lot of ways, I have posited this opinion across this country. In a lot of ways, we feel that the government is running this country. People need to remember, it's the people running the government. For 50 years, we have allowed governments to run us. We need to turn that tide. We need to demand better. And like what happened in 2015, governments need to know, you don't perform, thank you, but no thanks. Joel, final words.
Fine. I like the note that you start for me to end, because that's precisely how I want to end tonight. One of the problems, I talk about energy as a big factor keeping us back in terms of national competitiveness. The other major one is human capital. We have a huge human capital deficit, and this is a historic phenomenon unique to Guyana. And historically, the historians would tell you, and the older folks who are watching would tell you, that we suffered a large brain drain, and people migrated back in the 80s and 70s or whenever because of political reasons, the political state of the country then. The last labor force survey we have, when you look at the composition of the labor force, less than 1%, 0.2% and 0.3% respectively, people have tertiary level education at a level of master's and PhD. Now that correlates to the argument we're making right there in terms of we have a human capital problem. If we go back to Singapore, I want to read a quick line. What Singapore had done was really basic in that it understood well enough that its own people should be the most important factor in its economic development. So I'm saying today, I was looking at the video before the program started. Singapore is investing in smart tech education. At the level of primary school, they're teaching the children their coding, ICT. This is what will shape the world, shape the future of the economy, right? So at least, if we don't have a smart government, let's have a smart population. Let's look at the quality of our education. On a quick note, let me give you a quick comparison. A colleague was telling me the other day. In India and China, we know that they're known for having the best mathematicians in the world. But the level of mathematics that we teach at CXC, they teach it in primary school. So this is the problem when we talk about education. This is the things we need to look at. All right. So I'll conclude on that note tonight.
Our math had to go to the CCJ, right? Dan read that. 30 seconds, closing argument.
Yes. No. I want to end right on the issue that you said, that Joel said. The population, we have to be smart. And the way you start is by one, be aware of the issue. And I wish I can say this to every single Guyanese. Elections are coming up. Politicians are going to come to you and they're going to sing promises. They're going to tell you what they're going to do and all sorts of nice story. Here, what is the beautiful thing you have as every single Guyanese voter? Every single one of those politicians right now have had a time when they were in office. Hold them accountable to what they did. Ask them questions. Don't just buy what they're saying, and do not allow ourselves to fall prey to the race card that is going to be played. We have to, as the electorate, we have to be able to say, let us put all of this political nonsense, put all of this racial nonsense aside, and let me ask this presidential candidate or this ministerial candidate who is coming and campaigning for my vote, tell me exactly what you did in office for education for the past 5 years and how is this benefiting me? And if they have given you satisfactory answer to that, then make your pick. So
thank you.
Start with us.
Thank you. I think at the end of the day, thank you guys for being on board. We are really out of time now. Let me thank Globespan 24x7, thank Mr. Nohar Singh and Devin for our technical support, and thank all of you for being there and for sending us our messages. We'll certainly take this up another time. I believe it was a very engaging discussion. And what we'll do the next time is probably look at the areas that we want to focus on and get onto those discussions. But thank you guys. It's been great having you on board. Have a great evening. Have a great week. And let's keep Guyana alive. Let's be hungry for improvement across this country. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
One more thing before we leave. Sorry, we would just like to announce the results of the poll. The question that we asked our online audience, will the oil revenue change the life of all Guyanese? 22% responded yes, 36 responded no, and 42 responded maybe. Thank you.
Maybe.
Thank you. Well, there you go. I think a lot of people are also of the opinion that that the oil revenues are not going to get down to them. And the trickle down economy is not happening at all.
So, the fact that so many people say maybe shows that there is the potential for greatness. But continue on this path, we're not going to get there. That's what that data is saying.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, Doc.
Take care.
All right. Good.